Welcome to the learning and memorization video for this book, Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. We included this book in this month's mentor box, and I'm here with the author, Leif Babin.
Morning,
Leif,
Alex.
thanks for coming on board.
Thanks for having me.
And I want you, before we start, I want you guys to find the cheat sheet and also the memorization booklet. You guys are already watching the video, so put everything on the table in front of you. We're gonna briefly, I'm gonna ask Leif to tell us a little bit about his background and also why you wrote the book. And then we are gonna go through a few select exercises together. The combination of you guys listening to us, watching the video, and doing the memorization booklet together are three different ways of learning to teach the main concepts of the book to you guys. So, Leif, first tell us about the story, your story, as well as why you wrote the book.
I spent 9 years in the SEAL teams, and during that time, I got a chance to be a combat leader, a SEAL platoon commander in charge of a 16-man SEAL platoon in the Battle of Ramadi. And the Battle of Ramadi was during 2006, some very difficult, violent, daily, sustained urban combat operations that we were involved in. And frankly, we had some tremendous triumphs on the battlefield. We worked very closely with Army soldiers and Marines that helped take that city back from a brutal and evil insurgency. And we also had some tremendous tragedies as well. We lost the first SEALs killed in action in the Iraq War. These guys were brothers and friends. And that's a burden that I will carry with me forever as a combat leader. But from that combat, and we always talk about how combat is the ultimate teacher, we brought back a tremendous amount of lessons learned.
Yep.
And those are lessons that we then built, me and from my immediate boss, Jocko Willink, who's the co-author of the book, we then, when we came back home, we then took over leadership training programs. So he ran the entire West Coast SEAL team training department, that we call it training detachment, and then I took over a SEAL leadership training course called the Junior Officer Training Course, and every single SEAL officer that graduated from our training pipeline went through my training program. And all I did was try to pass on the lessons learned that we had taken from those tough combat situations, give those people, give those young leaders the chance to go out and succeed on different battlefields and try to teach them the things that I wish someone had taught me before I was in those situations.
Okay, and so one of the things that is actually interesting, I was reading the book, and one of the things that crossed my mind is that a lot of decision-making approaches or methods that you guys use to make decisions or execute some complex operation on the battlefield, they're actually applicable to either real life or business. And the similarities, the parallel is incredible. Obviously, the stakes aren't as high on the battlefield, but the same concepts applies. And the reason that we decided to include this book is that you work with businesses now these days. Using these methods, if they work on the battlefield, it works in day-to-day life. Am I right?
As I said, combat is the ultimate teacher, and
right.
I think so many people have this misconception of what battlefield leadership's like, or
right.
that the military is just a bunch of Terminator robots that do exactly what they're told to do. But the reality is they're people.
Right.
And for a combat leader, what you're trying to do is get a diverse group of people, some of them that maybe don't even work for each other, and you've got all these different pieces and moving parts, whether it's Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, and then the foreign forces that we work with as well. In our experience was Iraqi soldiers, and they have a different chain of command as well. So we're working with all these different pieces and parts,
Just like
and
real life.
you're trying to get them to work together, mutually support one another to accomplish a strategic goal, and that's your mission on the battlefield. And that's exactly what any business is trying to do: get a diverse group of people together to try to mutually work together to accomplish a strategic goal. So it's the things that work on the battlefield absolutely work in the business world, work in life.
Yeah, and I mean, the book obviously is #1 New York Times bestseller, but what kind of reaction have you gotten after writing the book?
You know what, the reaction's been amazing. I couldn't have guessed that the people from so many walks of life. And when we wrote this book, and it's written, as you know, because we have had a leadership consulting business for the last 5 years. So we worked with, we're probably pushing, well over 100. We're probably near 200 companies we've worked with over the last 5 years. Jocko and I have worked with, and analyzed their leadership problems and helped them build better teams. So the book is written with a combat example, then the principle, and then the business example and how it's applied. So it was written as a leadership-focused book, but so many people have told us, this book has made me a better parent, a better spouse, a better coach, a better teacher, a better team member. From so many different walks of life, we've had just people that have talked about how this book has impacted them, made them better, made them take ownership of issues in their life that they were blaming on other people or making excuses for, and they've stepped up, took ownership, solved those problems. And they're doing a lot better as a result of that.
Yeah, all of these, the interesting thing is, even though the environments are different, obviously, being in a battle versus starting a business versus being a parent, they're all different environments, but the types of problems that you're solving are always like the same kind of things, like getting people, to rally behind a cause, getting people to go after a particular problem or obstacle and overcoming it. These are not limited to business owners. These are not limited to commanders on the battlefield. These are problems that even in your household, a lot of times you deal with it. And the method to solve these, a lot of these, it's the same concept, the same solutions, just a slightly different, way of framing the problem, but the same approach. Yeah.
Look, I think it can help people across the board. I can tell you, for my wife, when she frequently reminds me that I wrote a book called Extreme Ownership. If I ever get into where I'm casting blame or I'm making excuses or those sort of things. So the reality is that cover and move, for example, right? That's a gunfighting tactic we use on the battlefield.
Right.
One person laying down cover fire so that the other element can move.
Right.
Whether it's element versus element or a one person versus another person shooter pair, and it's. Parenting is exactly like that, right? You've got to have cover and move. You've got to work together. You've got to cover one another, and you got to work together as a team. Okay. So I think that's just one small example of how it absolutely applies. And this idea of extreme ownership. If you can stop casting blame and pointing fingers and making excuses, you're going to turn your performance around in a tremendous way. Because that's what most people do. I think that's human nature to do those things.
Right.
And if you're not doing that, you're going to run circles around everybody else.
Do you have kids?
I do.
Okay, how many?
I got 2.
Do you actually try to teach these concepts to them? Is it applicable?
Absolutely. They're both very young, but we've already started in that. And look, the reality is, if I try to get my toddler to do what I want him to do, I'm already in a position where I have to tell him why. Right? If he doesn't know why he's doing it, if I'm just saying you do it because I said so, it's never effective. It doesn't work.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the concepts we're going to talk about, like teaching people, telling people why they're doing something. It's just a simple trick, but it's very effective. So one of the things that I've observed about the education system is that, it teaches a lot of good stuff, obviously, but there are also a lot of life skills, like decision making, all these principles, that extreme ownership, principles that you talk about in the book, but somehow they're not taught in schools. Why do you think that's the case, and what should people do about it?
I think people have to learn those. They have to learn them on their own, and the best way you can do that is, if not through actual experience, then by reading. And I think reading books is a tremendous way to dive in and learn these things from people who have gone through those kind of experiences. For me, I think the really good teachers and really good leaders out there are passing these kind of skills on. Those are pretty rare. Those are pretty rare folks. But I think they've realized, even if they've called it something other than extreme ownership, the reality is there's what works and there's what doesn't work.
Right.
And so you all come to everyone who's had any experience in life, no matter good, bad, in certain industries, of business or on the battlefield or in education, can understand that there's what works and what doesn't, and they eventually are going to come to the same conclusions. That you're either going to execute a mindset of extreme ownership, where you take ownership of problems and develop solutions, or you're going to sit around and make excuses, cast blame, try to point fingers at somebody else, and the problems never get solved.
Yeah, and I can tell you that learning from your own mistakes and experiences is one way to learn, but it takes a very long time. You have to basically make all these mistakes, and then it would take years, and the cost is very high, which is one of the things that I've tried to do in my own life, and also we are trying to do through MentorBox, is that we are gonna kind of package other people's learnings, so they've done the mistakes, they've gone through all these things, to accelerate learning instead of like everybody going on their own and trying to learn on their own, which would take forever, just hand over, learn from other people's mistakes.
I think that's a great thing, and that's really what this book is about. I mean, the reason we wrote this book is to try to pass those lessons on to others, and not only in the military, but anywhere. Leaders, aspiring leaders across the world in any way, shape, or form, business and life. And as you know, most of what this book is about big mistakes that we made and passing those lessons on to other people.
Yeah, instead of them having to make the same mistake and learn. Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so what we are going to do now is we're going to go through a few of these exercises. Not everything, but we're going to go through a few of them. And if you've done these videos with us before, you know the drill already. Just pause whenever we go through the exercise and write down in your booklet the answer to the questions. Let's jump to exercise number 1, the main premise of the book, extreme ownership. So tell us about that.
This concept of extreme ownership, I mean, of all the things that we write about, of all the things that Jocko and I talk about, the reason we decided to title the book Extreme Ownership is because it's the fundamental mindset that's most important. It's really the foundation upon which everything else is built. And it's a mindset and it's an attitude. And that is that there's nobody else to blame. There's no excuses to make. I got to own everything in my world. And not just own everything in my world, but everything that impacts my mission. And when I started thinking about things like that, stuff that I'm not even in charge of or in control of, but if that impacts my mission, I'm going to take ownership of that. I'm going to figure out a way to solve that problem and get it done. And the absolute best leaders, whether in the business world, whether on the battlefield, are doing exactly that.
Okay. So the exercise here is actually pretty simple. And I mean, it's simple, but it's hard to actually be honest with yourself a lot of times. So the exercise is think about a situation in your life where it turned out to be a disaster, something that went wrong, and you were in charge of it. Write down, pause the video. I mean, think of a specific example. Pause the video and write it down, because when you write it down, it becomes personalized in your head. Write down the exact situation that it doesn't have to be a disaster, but something that you were not happy with the outcome, and it could be your personal life or it could be business life or professional. Write it down. And once you've done that, then the next thing is, one, did you actually feel like you owned that problem? Or you just blamed it on someone else and just, that was your excuse. That's a way to actually avoid addressing, understanding why it went wrong. And then the exercise is, think what you, and we capitalized you, what you could have done differently to have a better outcome. So the idea is something went wrong, specify what exactly it was, and also now that you have written it down, then think about, okay, what could I have done differently to change the outcome? I think that's a good exercise. So basically, the idea is, and this is something I've observed over and over again, people think they are victims of things that have gone wrong. Instead of thinking, okay, they would blame it on others and they stop there, instead of taking ownership and thinking what they could have done differently. So they think they're victims, and the moment you say that I don't own the problem, that's when you stop analyzing, and you stop analyzing that, okay, so next time I own this and I want to, and I am ultimately, it is my responsibility and I need to do things so that I get the desired outcome, and blaming it on others doesn't really help. Does that make sense?
That's exactly the case. And not only, it's not that it doesn't really help, it actually hurts substantially.
That's right.
So that if you're blaming it on others, or you're making excuses, or in some cases not even acknowledging that it's a problem, or you're afraid to admit that I made a mistake and accept ownership of that because of the consequences or whatever, no one is ever taking action to resolve the problem, come up with a different solution, and actually produce a better outcome, so the team can win or you can win. So I think those are really that's really a key concept. So many people think I can't admit fault, I can't admit mistakes, and the reality is who do you have more respect for? If
Right.
you think about someone that you've worked with or worked for, or someone that you know in your family, or
Right.
the person who's blaming obvious failures on other people when it's clearly not those other people's fault, who is making excuses for some clear failures. Do you have more respect for that person, or the person who actually says, you know what, I totally screwed this up, and we need to figure out a way to do that differently? Hey, or can I want to reach out to others who have more experience, who can help me solve this problem, so I don't want to do this again, and we'll share that information with other people. You have way more respect for that person who can take ownership. So no one is going to be mistake-free. Everyone is going to make mistakes. This entire book is about huge mistakes that we made on the battlefield. So this expectation that you're going to somehow be above that, and everyone is going to fall. Everyone is going to fail in some capacity, but it's what you learn from that, taking ownership of that, so that you can not repeat those mistakes and produce a better outcome, and you can win.
Yeah, absolutely. So own the problem, and think always that don't shift the blame. What could you have done differently to create a different outcome for the problems? Exercise 2. No bad teams, only bad leaders. Tell us about that.
This is a very humbling concept to think about.
Yes,
It's very easy to think, if I just had a better team, we'd
Right.
perform better. And I can tell you, as a leader, there are times when I made those excuses and thought about, well, that other team over there that's doing the same thing that I'm doing, and they're outperforming on my team. Well, they just got lucky.
Right.
They got a better team. They just got lucky. We have our own struggles, and no matter what I do, this team's not going to get any better. So why, you can really fall into that trap.
Right.
And there's times when I think about where I made excuses when that happened. One of the most glaring examples of this that I saw when I came back from Ramadi, that combat deployment, I was teaching leadership to the next generation of SEAL leaders, and I would go out and work our Hell Week, we call it, during our training. So in SEAL training, we call it BUDS, or Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. And it's about a 27-week program. We have about a 70 to 80% attrition rate. So most people that start do not make it through the program. They end up quitting. They ring the bell 3 times and decide to go home. Some people get injured, but most people quit. Most people just decide it's not for them. The most difficult part of that 27-week program is this 5-day period called Hell Week. And it is 5 continuous 24-hour days, nonstop physical evolutions, virtually no sleep. And it's awesome. It is awesome training. I mean, it is, guys are, you're just pushed to the brink, way beyond what you thought possible. And that's where, the vast majority of students end up quitting the program during that time. At the second or third night in, when they've been up for 48, 72 hours straight, and they're exhausted, and they think, how am I going to continue this for another, for days, and they end up ringing the bell and quit. So I'm watching. I'd gone through this 4 years before as a student. Now I'm watching this as an instructor. And it was interesting to see everything you do during that time is a race. So you have the students are divided up into boat crews of seven men each. So 7 students each. Each of those boat crews has a leader. So the senior guy is a leader, and they're all assigned to these big rubber boats, about a 200-pound or so inflatable rubber boat. And everything that you do with those teams is a race. So the instructors say all the time, it pays to be a winner. And if you win the race, as boat crews are competing with each other, if you win the race, you get to sit out in the next race. You don't get to sleep, but if you've been up for 72 hours straight, even, in your nonstop physical evolutions, even just sitting down for 10 minutes is a big reward.
Yeah.
The corollary to it pays to be a winner, though, is it really sucks to be a loser. And the instructors will be all over you. They pull the weaker boat crews that are struggling. They get all kinds of extra attention and added grueling physical activity that's sprinting over berms and extra push-ups and bear crawls and all the kinds of horrible things the instructors can do to you. So guys that are already exhausted are falling further and further behind. And as I'm sitting here watching this as an instructor, we watched one boat crew 2 was winning every race. Another boat crew 6 was losing every race. And boat crew 2 that was winning, they even though they were tired, they had smiles on their faces, they were working well together. Boat crew 6, you could hear them screaming and yelling and cussing at each other and just clearly blaming their problems on the others.
Right.
And one of the instructors said, you know what, let's perform an experiment here. Let's swap out the boat crew leaders. I thought, wow, that's interesting. I mean, can it possibly make a difference here? I mean,
So everything else the same.
Everything else stays the same.
The...
Just going to swap the one person, the leader.
Okay.
Call those guys over. Boat crew 2 leader, you're not going to boat crew 6. Boat crew 6, you're not going to boat crew 2. And you can imagine Boat Crew 2 leader's reaction was, he can't say anything in that environment, but you can see from his face, he's obviously not happy. They're taking him away from a great team that he's proud of being a part of, and he's built, and now he's going to go work with these guys in Boat Crew 6 that
has been losing every time.
Boat Crew 6, I mean, you can see it on his face, just gigantic smile, so excited. Now, the wrongs in the world are being righted. I got this bad team, and now I'm going to go to the good team.
Okay,
and it was just obvious, the way he was reacting to that. So we switched those guys out, sent them out on the next race, and who do you think comes across the finish line first?
Don't tell me
Boat
that.
Crew 6.
Yeah.
The losing Boat Crew comes across the finish line first, as they've gone from worst team in the group to best. And that's how powerful leadership is. Leadership is the most important thing on the battlefield. It's the greatest factor in whether a team succeeds or fails. And by leaders, it doesn't have to just be the senior guy at the top. In that case, you've got a guy who goes in and takes over the boat crew and gets them working together, stops getting them focused on themselves and blaming each other, focuses them on the mission, makes them believe it's possible to win, and they go out and execute, and that's great. But his boat crew that he left, now they have a bad boat crew leader. They continue to perform well, and they were neck and neck with the other boat crew. So I think that's another example too, that it's leaders at every level, not just the senior person in charge. Someone has got to step up, take ownership, and lead.
Right.
And those guys already did in their boat crew. They knew how to win. They kept that performance going well. And Boat Crew 2 and 6 now are we're vying for first place in virtually every race. So it's this concept is so difficult when you want to cast blame or think I should have a better team, or somebody else needs to come hire this person, or someone needs to fix these problems. That's really what extreme ownership is about, is the recognition that it's up to me. I got to take ownership, and there really are no bad teams, only bad leaders. And even if I'm not the senior guy in charge, I can step up, I can take ownership, I can lead, and I can help my team perform better.
Yeah, and I think that's a concept that I think pretty much everyone has encountered in one way or another, at work, in your personal life. I mean, you have been, let's say, even like students, they're like, you have a project and that is not going well for the class. And it's pretty common for people to say, oh, I ended up with a sucky team, and that's why my team isn't doing very well. And that's your first knee-jerk reaction. And what we want you to do, and what we are doing in this exercise, is that think of a situation like that. Again, personalize the concept to your own life. Think of a situation where it could be a study group, it could be some small team at work, or whatever it is, when you were in charge, but things were not going well. And then be honest with yourself. Did you blame your team for the underperformance of that project? And if you did, trust me, most likely the problem is you just failed to recognize it.
Absolutely. Exercise
4, check the ego. Tell us about that.
Ego can be a great driver for performance. And I think for any folks that are doing extraordinary things in the world, ego is driving them to do well.
Right.
It's pushing them to want to be better. And we took great pride as our SEAL task unit bruiser, and my platoon, Charlie platoon, we took pride in being able to go into some areas that nobody else could get into, to take our guys in there and be able to, take on a very determined group, a well-equipped group of enemy fighters, and then, be able to come out of those areas generally and do some big damage to the bad guys, help open them up for the Army, Marine Corps, and the Iraqi soldiers to go in. So ego can be a driver to help you do some great things. It can also be catastrophic.
Yes.
And of all the, as Jocko and I work with, whether we worked with leaders in the SEAL teams, when we saw major issues and people that failed, it was because of ego. Now that we've worked with so many different business leaders, we've worked with hundreds of business leaders in about every industry you can imagine. And the ones that fail, the ones that struggle, it's ego. Ego is the 99.9% of the issue. 99.9% of the issues are in a matter of ego. And so ego is when you get to a point where you can't listen to other people because you got it all figured out.
Right.
Where you know everything.
Right.
Why would you read books and try to learn from other people's mistakes,
right,
or learn from other people's way of doing things? When you start getting complacent, you stop wanting to educate yourself or adapt to new technologies or implement new technologies or new techniques and ways of doing things. And most of all, when your ego gets so big and you can't keep it in check, the worst piece of that is that you cannot self-assess. You can't look in the mirror and say,
I'm doing well.
Where am I screwing up? Where can I get better? Where's my team need to get better?
Right.
How can I better contribute? Where are my weaknesses and the things that I really need to work on?
Yeah.
And so that is catastrophic. The worst, again, the only leaders I've ever seen fail are the people that just could not sit down, listen, take constructive criticism, look to other people for their ideas because they felt like they had it all figured out. And those leaders inevitably fail and generally get fired.
Yeah, and it's I call it the ability to be honest with yourself. And it's actually interesting. Most people, even I've seen people fill out these exercises. And when they write down, which is one of why I emphasize all the time, is that no one's looking when you're doing these exercises. That's the best opportunity to be honest with yourself. Like check your ego, basically. So if like some people, they have such an inflated view of themselves that even in private, when they're writing about a particular situation in their own journals, they cannot even, in that situation, they can't be honest with themselves. So, the best way, so that the trick for me, the way I actually kind of address it is I try to be honest with myself in private first, before doing it in front of others. In other words, I tell myself that, Alex, you're screwing this up. To myself, or write it down in my journal. And then that makes it already easier once you acknowledge it to yourself in private to then go out and say that in front of others. Do you have any exercise like that, or?
I don't, I mean, look, those internal, that internal self-reflection is critical.
Yeah.
Whether you're actually writing it down or not, I mean, I think that has to happen, certainly.
Right.
But more importantly, you have to believe that.
Yeah.
And I think when people go in and say, hey, this wasn't my fault,
right.
or cast blame, I mean, some people, they think with extreme ownership they can go in and just say, hey, yeah, I said that was my bad.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. You actually have to truly accept ownership.
Believe
and
it. You just got to believe it. Yeah.
And if someone's going to get fired because this huge mistake was made, then it should be you if you were in charge of that. And you got to be willing to accept that. But yet, most of the time, you don't get fired because it is. If you're taking an ownership of a situation, you're saying, "I'm going to make sure this never happens again." Mm-hmm. Very hard to fire that person.
Yeah.
Very easy to fire the person that's casting blame and just making excuses and pointing fingers at other people.
Yeah, and we gave you an example that, in this case, you're a wedding photographer and you basically screw up the job. You're not, something goes wrong and you don't do well. Do you blame it on others? Think about that situation. I mean, you can use the example we gave you, or you can come up with your own example and run through it. Would you blame others, or you would honestly think to yourself, believe it, like you said, not just say it, believe it, okay, I did this wrong, therefore, bad outcome. So, I mean, we want you guys, and again, the whole point of writing these things is that a lot of times people say, okay, I get it. But the truth is, end of the day, it's in order for you to be able to implement these things in your real life, you have to personalize it and actually write it down, or actually walk through a scenario in your own life where this concept would have been applicable. So take the time, pause the video, and fill out this exercise. And I think it's important. I mean, it's personally, to me, that's something that I do all the time. Exercise number 5, cover and move. Tell us about that.
Cover and move is a gunfighting tactic. So if you and I are trying to maneuver across a street under fire, how do we do that? If we're not working together, if we're not mutually supporting one another, we're going to get killed. We're certainly not going to accomplish our mission. But if I'm laying down suppressive fire and either killing the bad guys that are shooting at us or keeping their head down, you're able to move. And you can safely move. They can't target you. Then you get to a position where you're laying down suppressive fire for me, and then I move. And when Jocko and I first started talking about this, it was like, how is this going to relate to the business world? I mean, we're talking about gunfighting tactic here, and the reality is it's simply teamwork.
Right.
Everybody is dependent on other people to get the job done. Nobody's out there on their own, and so whether it's you've got teams within the team that you're dependent on, and then you've got teams that are outside the team that you're dependent on as well. In any kind of business or in any kind of life situation. So it's all about relationships. That's really what Cover Move's about. And people have this idea in the military that, you know, I can scream and yell at people and tell them what to do, and they have to go carry out those orders. But the reality is, if I've got troopers that don't trust me, that don't respect me, or are questioning why I'm telling them to do something, then they're gonna have a hard time carrying that out. So I have to build a relationship with them, and if they trust me, if they respect me, they understand why we're doing. I'm taking the time to share that stuff with them. That relationship is going to allow us to perform better. And so oftentimes in Cover Move, people want to point fingers and say, you know, I did my part, but that team over there didn't do their part, you know, and that's why we failed. If the team fails, everybody fails.
Yep.
But if the team wins, everybody wins. So this is where, you know, you got to take charge of not just the things you're responsible for, but the things that impact your mission. So if another department you're not responsible for didn't do their part, and you felt like they dropped the ball, well, you got to go build a relationship with that person, and recognize it's probably not just because they're bad, probably not because they're trying to sabotage you,
right.
Probably not because they're trying to make the team fail. Maybe there's something you didn't give them that they needed.
Right.
So that's really what building those relationships are about, and recognize that you're all in this together. The enemy is actually outside the wire. We use that term in the military. The wire is your defensive perimeter, and the bad guys are outside the wire. All of us inside are together, and you'll see frictions between different units and different services, and you know, and you got to recognize that we're all on the same team. And so, in life, in your business, in whatever capacity, you got to recognize that the people that you're dependent on, you're all on the same team. You can't just blame them, can't make excuses, and can't create antagonistic relationships with them. You got to build a strong working relationship with them so you guys can mutually support one another and Cover and Move.
Yeah, and the exercise is actually pretty simple. So think of a situation in your company, I mean in jobs, especially in your job, in your business. Or if you're a student, think of, you know, student groups, in your student group where you can't work with others in your team to accomplish something. Now brainstorm, like basically try to be creative. Think of 5 ways, specific things that you can do to improve that particular relationships. And I'm sure you've seen this in businesses. Like, can you give us like a concrete example of something you've seen in a business where this particular, like being cognizant of the fact that you need to work with other people, and then working intentionally to improve your working relationship with others has helped tremendously.
Yeah, I mean, you see it in business all the time. If the sales team says, well, we didn't meet our numbers this week, and that's because the product that's being delivered is inadequate, and also the customer service is garbage, so that we're not getting adequate customer service, so our repeat customers are not coming back to us, and they just blame it all on them. Instead of actually going and saying, look, we're all in this thing together. So if I feel like customer service needs to improve, then I need to provide them that feedback. I need to go help them understand how what they do impacts the sales and what we're doing. And the same thing for production. Like, hey, there's some issues here with this quality of the product, so we need to work. Here's some things that I'm seeing.
Right.
And then the more that sales, production, and customer service can work together, mutually support one another, the relationship that they build will make that company incredibly effective, whereas before, there were issues.
So here's a trick I've used to actually improve that very same thing in my companies. I have people in one role to go and work as someone in another team for a week. So I would have someone in sales going to customer support, someone in customer support going to product management. And it's the best way to improve working relationship between people with different functions is to actually have them walk in the other man's shoes or woman's shoes for a week. So the moment you understand that, does military do that? Have you seen that particular thing?
Maybe not in an official capacity, but I think the more any good unit is going to make sure that their people do that. And
so they switch
So you
roles.
can plug in and understand, if I'm working with Bradley fighting vehicles, which is kind of a smaller tank, I need to go talk to the Bradley fighting vehicle commander and the driver and gunner and understand what the capabilities and limitations of that
and maybe ride in it for a day.
Exactly. So the more you can spend time around those things, the better it is. And it's not always practical to be able to do that. I mean, not every company can afford to send people for a week. If you can do that, I think that's an outstanding thing. The least you can do, I think, is share information, provide briefs, and we've facilitated briefings where a general overview brief of what a particular department does is given to other department leaders, and it's amazing. People that worked 30 feet down the hall from each other for years they had no idea
They
what
had
each
no
other were
idea.
doing, and,
Right.
and what how those people could better support them, how they might be able to better support what they were doing. So it's the more information sharing you can do, the better. It's all about relationships.
I've used another trick to improve this. This is a really important thing, by the way. Another thing I've seen in my companies were let's say product managers and designers. They were always blaming each other, right? And you can have them do each other's job for a week, that's one way, but sometimes a product manager doesn't know how to use Photoshop, so you can actually really swap them. So what I did was I would come up with alternate seatings. So I would have a product manager sit next to a designer, sit next to a product manager, sit to a designer. So I would shuffle, literally physically in the office, I would shuffle the teams and I would have them sit next to each other. And you would be amazed, like you and I sitting next to each other working, how versus I'm sitting here and you're sitting on the other side of the room. That simple thing, like it improves communication and empathy and appreciation for what the other person does drastically. So, I mean, these are some of the techniques. Obviously, every situation is different, but the thing is, once you know what you're trying to accomplish, you can think of creative ways to actually accomplish it. So, understand the problem and try to apply creativity to that.
Exercise 9, decentralized command. What decentralized command is really just extreme ownership and action on the battlefield. It's leaders at every level stepping up and leading. People talk about this, it's a buzzword in the military, it's a buzzword in the business world, but it's really simple. It just means that everybody leads. Everybody leads. That's what decentralized command is about. Now, in order for everyone to lead, there has to be some very clearly defined roles and responsibilities. There has to be a very clear objective. In the military, we call it commander's intent. Or end state, the overall strategic mission that you're trying to accomplish. And that's got to be clear in everybody's minds. And then there has to be some very clear decision making. We call it left or right limits in the military. You could draw a box, right? Of within this box, this is my ability to execute, and this is on me, and I'm going to lead, and I'm going to own this, and I'm going to run with these things. Outside of this box, I can't make that decision, but I at least can make a recommendation up the chain of command. And that's really what decentralized command is about. It's so oftentimes we see organizations where you've got a very strong leader who kind of makes all decisions, and then people start deferring to that leader, even if it was within their ability to make decisions. They want to come in and they want to defer to that leader and say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And so that leader just continually makes those decisions all the time, and that's very, very centralized. The other side of that coin is that there are some junior leaders out there often that think, well, I'm being micromanaged. If there's questions coming down, the chain of command at all about anything that I'm doing, this is my team, I should be able to lead my team. And it's that team has to relate to the overall strategic objectives. It requires some very clear communication. So you can't have total chaos with a bunch of different teams, a bunch of different leaders or individuals out doing their own thing.
Right.
Decentralized command is there has to be clear lines of communication, a clear chain of command. I think one thing that people need to understand about decentralized command too is that even if the greatest battlefield leaders of all time, you can't manage.
Yep.
You can't manage dozens and dozens or hundreds or even thousands of people at the same time, right? How do you do that?
I would say
How do you do
cap
that? You
at
can't.
10 maximum.
You can't do that. I would tell you that what the military has come to terms with is 4 to 6. That is kind of the when and I'm talking in a very chaotic situations, under pressure, when things go bad. Maybe you can do more than that when things are going great and nothing's going wrong. But eventually things are going to go wrong.
Right.
So when that does happen, if you're only looking to a few key leaders who can then go out and look to their few key leaders, that is how one person is able to manage thousands or hundreds or dozens of people at the same time. And that's really what decentralized command is about. So, Jocko is commander of Task Unit Bruiser with 40 SEALs and 40 or 50 support personnel. When we're out on the battlefield with our 40 or so SEALs, he's looking to me as a platoon commander and another platoon commander to talk to him about where our guys are and what they're doing. I'm looking to my key leaders. I got 2 squad leaders. I've got 2 non-commissioned officers, our senior enlisted guys, that I'm looking for to tell me about when we have our make sure that we have our head counts. Everyone is there. They can lead their teams, and that's really what decentralized command looks like. And in the business world, there are people that it's exactly the same thing. When you try to take on too many direct reports as a leader, you can't manage that. There's too many things going on. You've got to be able to empower leaders to step up and lead their teams. So often I see this with business leaders that say, "Well, I don't trust my people," or "You don't understand. You know, I'm concerned about the quality or their experience level." And then I said, "Well, where's your training program? You know, what are you doing to train and mentor them? What are you doing to get them better?" And oftentimes it's non-existent, or certainly doesn't exist in the capacity that it needs to in order to make folks get better, provide experience to them, and build that trust and confidence that's necessary. So that is really required for decentralized command. Leaders at every level need to be doing that. Need to be training their teams. Every leader should be trying to work themselves out of a job where they're training and mentoring the leaders that are junior to them to be able to step up and take over their job so they can move up the chain as the organization grows. And that facilitates effective decentralized command.
Yeah, and it requires conscious effort. And I try to do this all the time, and I have a trick that I use. Actually, I did it, now that I have a term, decentralized command, I didn't have the term. Thanks for giving me the term. But I've been doing this in my businesses for years, and the way I do it is I ask a simple question from whoever I'm trying to empower to actually be able to take decisions in my absence. I ask them, if I die right now or today, would you be able to continue with the mission without me? And it's a little bit, okay, jars.
You don't want to be giving them ideas now, Alex.
Yeah, that's right. But, but it kind of puts the focus on the question of whether or not, so this is how I think about it. In order to enable somebody to be able to make decisions in your absence, which is the best thing, like you said, work yourself out of a job, you need to answer 3 questions. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And what are the tools that are at our disposal to actually accomplish the mission? So a lot of times the delegation doesn't happen effectively because either you told the person a little bit about what we are doing, but you have not conveyed the big picture. The second thing is, why are we doing it? Like, there's always a why behind people's actions. The best way to actually convince people or motivate people to actually be able to take initiative on their own is to articulate the reason why they're doing something. So tell them a story. This is our story. This is why we're doing this. This is the bigger picture. This is where we're going. And then the last step is, which you actually touched on, which is like having training programs. Like, what are the tools? Like, teach me, show me the ropes. So once you have all those 3 in place, then you can ask the question. First from yourself, is I ask that question from myself all the time. Let's say I just turn off my cell phone and go on a trip for 1 week. Nobody can reach me. What would happen to my business? Can these people, make decisions, good decisions? Would people show up at work tomorrow and the job gets done without me?
That's the mark of good leadership. And if the job would get done without you, then you're an effective leader because you're training the people beneath you to step up and lead. And I think that that's really the most important piece is the why that you just talked about. If people don't understand why, they can't execute. So as a leader, oftentimes it's easy to get frustrated if people aren't doing what you feel like they're not stepping up and they're not taking ownership or they're going in a different direction than I wanted them to. Well, they don't understand why. I've got to do a better job of articulating why. And if you're not in a leadership position, if you're being tasked to do something and you're being told what to do, you got to recognize that the boss isn't a mind reader as well, so that you have to ask the question, why? Can you help me understand, what is your overall intent here? What's the strategic mission that we're trying to accomplish? And that will give you the ability to lead and to be able to make decisions so that you can help get the key tasks done in order to drive toward accomplishing that strategic goal.
Yeah, and that's important. If why is missing, that means, first and foremost, that is the leader's job to articulate that. But even if they haven't, then it is your job to ask the leader why. Basically, why has to be articulated regardless of whether the person at in charge actually took the time to do it, or if they didn't, you can't just sit there. You have to ask the right questions. This is a great exercise. So I propose you guys to stop and pause the video and fill out this exercise.
Number 12, leading up the chain of command. This is a very challenging thing. You know, people say, well, how can I lead up the chain? I'm going to lead people that are senior to me. You know, how does that work? The reality is every good leader's got to be able to lead up the chain of command. As well as, you know, down, you got to be able to lead up. Part of leading up the chain of command is in the military, we always call it drinking the haterade. And I've drank some haterade in my time where you're angry about the chain of command and the distant boss that's, you know, miles away from you, that doesn't understand what you're doing and doesn't get the details of what you're in. Now, and I see that all the time in the business world where you know, people talk about corporate headquarters or they just don't get it, you know, the infamous they that people talk about. And the reality is, does the boss want you to fail? Of course not. The boss doesn't want you to fail. Does the boss want to make your life harder, throw a bunch of paperwork on you just to you know, to give you a bunch of extra work to do? Of course not. Do they? If they're not approving resources or training you've requested or approval of your plans in a timely manner, why? Why is that? The reality is, they want you to win. They want you to succeed, and if they're not giving you the support that you think you need, then it's your fault. You got to do a better job of leading up the chain of command, and that means you have to pass information. You have to make them help the boss understand why it's critical, why this is important, why this, you know, why you need these resources, or why this training is going to help you, or why this plan needs to be approved in a timely manner. So all these things, it's really just, again, it's about relationships and recognizing, like, the boss isn't evil, the boss isn't bad, the boss if he doesn't understand what's going on at my level in the organization, then it's up to me to make sure that we articulate that and that he gets it and understands it. And that's really what leading up the chain of command is about. So if you take that kind of ownership of your world, I did that on the battlefield where I was complaining about things and griping about things and drinking the haterade as I talked about. And then I recognized that, like, well, you know what? I got to lead up the chain. If the boss has got questions about how I'm mitigating some of the extreme risks that we're taking here, he's not here with us. He doesn't understand. I've got to do a better job of articulating that to him. And once I took that attitude, it was a game changer for us. We got our plans approved. We got a lot less questions and scrutiny. We got the resources we asked for, and it was awesome.
Yeah, and the exercise here is actually, I think this is a really important point, because people just think that, you know, the boss, either they think the boss knows something that they don't, or they think that the boss just simply doesn't care or understand their problems. But the thing is, a lot of times, it is up to you to actually go and make the point about something that is not right, or you feel that is not right, and the person above you just simply doesn't know. So just the simple fact of articulating that point to your boss can change things. And the exercise is pretty simple. So think of a situation, things that you think in your job or in your life, or in whatever project you're on, aren't done the way they should be. And you don't understand why. So why not turn that into a question and think of 3 questions and just go simply ask the questions. You don't even have to tell, just ask the question. Why this thing is done in a particular way, I think it should be done differently, but you are telling me to do it this way. Why? So asking that question, like 3 of those, would tremendously help you guys.
Exercise 13, decisiveness amid uncertainty. This is something that, as a battlefield leader, you have to embrace the chaos and mayhem, and the fact that you're never going to have the 100% right solution to something, but yet you're going to have to execute as best you can with the information that you have. And I think that's no different for anybody in the business world or in life. You're never going to have, it's never going to be a 100% right solution or predictable outcome that you can know with absolute certainty, because life just throws curveballs, but you've got to execute as best you can with the information that you have. And a story that I think illustrated that we wrote about in the book is we were on what we call a sniper overwatch. So we would take my team, a small group of SEALs and some Iraqi soldiers, and we'd go deep into enemy territory. And we were the lead element for a larger army force, U.S. Army soldiers and their Iraqi soldiers, and they came in a few hours later than us. So we went under cover of darkness and set up in a building and put our snipers in position. And in this case, it was our lead sniper point man was Chris Kyle, the American sniper. that many of you are probably familiar with. And in this case, Chris was was in position. Chris was an outstanding sniper and was incredibly great at his craft. We had been in this area for several hours. As the sun came up, we saw that the Army soldiers started to come in. They were several hundred yards down the street from us, and they took over a group of buildings that was going to become a new combat outpost that they were going to live and build and work out of and be there with their Iraqi soldiers in a very particularly dangerous area of the city of Ramadi, an insurgent-held area that was an incredibly violent area. So we already had some bad guys shoot at us, so we knew bad guys were certainly in there shooting at us and at U.S. soldiers. And Chris came to me and said, "Hey, I see the silhouette of a guy in the second-story window." And so he gives me the building number, and on our maps, I'm trying to correlate the building that he's looking at to what we're looking at on the map by building number and street names that we've given, and he tells me he can see this guy, but he can't get what's called positive identification or PID. So he can't PID that this is a bad guy, but he can see the shape of a guy with a weapon in the second story window. Like, okay, that's not good. I call over to the Army, the U.S. Army company commander who was in charge of the area, and his soldiers were in that area, and asked him if he had anybody in that building. He came back and said he did not have anybody in that building. So I told him we were watching a guy with a weapon in that building. He said that's not my guy. Take that guy out. And he asked us to take the shot on that guy. And I said, well, we can't PID this guy. There's a lot of friendlies. Even if you're not in that building, we know that you're in buildings that are very close by. And I just didn't feel comfortable with that. So we kept going back and forth, and it was clear that Chris didn't feel comfortable with it either, as well. And he just kept an eye on that. Finally, I requested that Army company commander send his troops to go clear that building, and they were pretty angry at us for that. I couldn't order him to do that, but I was asked him to do it, and he knew it was the right call, and he was adamant to take the shot, pull the trigger, and then from his perspective, I'm asking him to take some of his troops, leave the safety of a concrete building, sprint out into the street in the middle of the daytime, and put themselves at great risk, and then enter a building where there may be an actual bad guy, at least one, maybe more, with weapons that were going to potentially kill or wound, his guys as they try to clear that building. So. It was a bad situation. I hated to ask them to do that, but I knew it was, after thinking about it and analyzing that decision, I knew it was not the right call to make at that. There was too many friendlies in the area. Mm-hmm. It was too easy to make mistakes about what you were looking at. And as soon as his guys, he reluctantly agreed to send his guys to clear the building. As soon as they exited the building, I realized the building that we were looking at was the building they were in. Mm-hmm. And we had misidentified the building on the map, which is very easy to do. It's something that could happen frequently. And yet, so what he had thought was certainty, like, no, my guys aren't in that building. And yet we were looking at a U.S. soldier with a weapon. Had Chris pulled the trigger on that guy, it would have been horrific, horrible. I mean, it would have been all the good that we've done on the battlefield, the lives that we've saved, and the soldiers that and Marines that were coming home to their families as a result of the work that we're doing, and the Iraqi populace that we'd helped liberate from the brutal reign of terror of this insurgency. All of that would have been undone immediately, with that one simple act. It would have been horrific, and I think all I could have done at that point was turn in my trident and say, "Send me home." I mean, it would have been a horrible thing. So thank God I did not make that call, even under pressure to make the call. I knew there was. I just didn't have a good feeling about that, and I thank God I stood my ground on that, and it scared me, frankly, to think about just how easily it could have gone the other way. Just how easily I could have made a different decision, and what the consequences of that would have been. And the company commander, later said, "Thank God you guys didn't listen to me on that. I'm glad we were able to work that out, and thank God we didn't have that situation happen." So. In anywhere in life, in your business, in your world, there's going to be some uncertainty. There's going to be
always.
You're not going to have the full, complete picture.
Never.
And you've got to make the best decisions you can in those kind of situations. And I think that's really what this chapter is about: is understanding that you've got to be decisive, and you've got to make the calls with the best call that you can with the information that you have, and be comfortable with those calls. And if it's the right call, even if you're getting pressure to do otherwise, you got to stand your ground.
Yeah, and one of the things that I tell people is the most important thing you do every day is making decisions. And it's interesting that when I was reading that chapter of your book, as we were talking about it before shooting this video, I have looked at decision-making frameworks many years ago, and I've tried to apply formal decision-making frameworks. It's like it's a branch of mathematics called decision theory. And it was interesting to read why you decided not to take the shot. And then I can tell you that in the heat of the battle, you were able to make the right call based on a decision framework that I call regret minimization. And it's actually pretty simple, and I found it to be very useful. And that's actually what you were able to accomplish in the heat of the battle in that moment. Make the decision really quickly, the right decision. Regret minimization basically tells you whenever you are at a fork and you have to take path A or path B, or pull the trigger, not pull the trigger. Think of, if I pull the trigger, what is the worst, and things don't go well, meaning you pull the trigger and it turns out to be an American soldier. How much would you regret that decision? A lot. It's like almost unfathomable. You can't even imagine.
The worst case scenario.
Yeah. And then if you don't pull the trigger, meaning take the other path, and things don't work out, yes, it is about outcome, meaning it is an actual insurgent, you didn't pull the trigger. But comparing the amount of regret that you would take from these two paths, there's no question that you shouldn't pull the trigger at that point. And this applies to most things. Like, people come to me with questions like, should I drop out of my job to start a company? Should I drop out of college to do this? Or, and I say, okay, think if you take decision A and things don't work out, how much would you regret that? Then think if you take decision B and things don't work out, how much would you regret that? And go for the path that results in minimum regret, which is like one decision framework. The other thing that you also mentioned in the book, again, another decision-making framework, is that decisions that are reversible are hugely preferable to decisions that are irreversible. So when you shoot a guy, you can't unshoot it. But if you don't shoot, you can shoot the guy later. So
very true. Yeah,
and that particular thinking, and the reason that I say this is because I see people, struggle with decisions. I mean, it's literally making decisions is the most important thing we do every day. So it's important to know these tools so that, a lot of people make decisions. Almost 99% of people, most of the time or all the time, they make decisions based on gut feeling. And gut feeling is okay. It is one way to make decisions. And some people have really good gut feelings and some people don't. But, that's one way to make decisions. But then there are frameworks like what I just mentioned, regret minimization, or looking at whether or not a decision can be reversed later. And it's helpful to have those tools, ready when you're making these decisions, because they kind of help you frame the question the right way and maybe make a better decision because you were able to reframe the question and ask the question the right way from yourself. So
I think that's a great thing, and it's a great way of looking at it. And I haven't analyzed it, in that aspect, but certainly that reversible piece is it makes it very easy to make the decision.
Yeah.
And for regret minimization, that's really just thinking strategically. All right, in the long-term consequences of this, that can really help you, see what the right call is. The reason people have a hard time doing that, whether it's on the battlefield, in business, or certainly in their own lives, is because they can't detach. And this detachment concept really ties into this, the concept of prioritize and execute in an earlier chapter, and you guys have gone through that in the exercise already if you're at this point. But prioritize and execute is very important. In order to be able to take a whole bunch of different things at the same time, how do I execute? What's the decisions I make to be able to figure out the highest priority task and then execute toward that highest priority task? And when you're trying to make those kind of decisions and think about what's the long-term strategic gain or what's reversible, if you're immersed in the details of something at the tactical level, it's very hard to see that. Whereas if you can pull yourself back and have that strategic view, this concept of detachment, that is what gives you the ability to do that. So on the battlefield, that is, if I'm looking down the sights of my weapon, then all I can see is this right. My world is that tiny little peephole through the sights of my weapon, and that's my only perspective. Yet, as a leader, I have to force myself to high point my weapon, literally gun pointed to the sky, so I can take a step back and then all of a sudden my world opens up like this, and that enables me to make those decisions. And whether you're in a leadership position, whether you're not in a leadership position, you have to force yourself to detach. If you feel like I don't know what the right answer is, take a step back from the immediate tactical problem, the immediate details. That is going to enable you to think about this and make the right decision, and enable you to see that regret minimization.
Literally take a walk away from
the
the situation. Yeah, it's a really great point.
Exercise 14, discipline equals freedom. This is a mantra that Jocko lives by and really taught us and built into our task unit, our SEAL task unit Bruiser. And this idea that, they seem like completely opposite things. Discipline seems, a rigid structure and you have to do things a certain way, and freedom being you have the ability to do whatever you want to do. And yet the pathway to freedom is only through discipline. And you can apply this to any aspect of your life. If you want financial freedom, how do you get financial freedom? You have to have financial discipline. You have to save your money. You have to have that discipline to give you the freedom to be able to go and spend it or buy a new house or a car or whatever you want. If you want more free time, how do you get that? You have to have a disciplined time management system. So only, if it's great to have that free time. If you were able to get up early in the morning and get stuff done and knock out things, then you're going to have the free time to go and do some of the things that you like to do, when the work is done. One of the ways that we do that is that early in the morning is key. 4:30 or 4:30 a.m. is a great wake up time, because how many phone calls are you getting? Is your family going to cut in, to what you're doing, or is one of your colleagues going to give you a call or send you a text message at 4:30 in the morning? Generally not. So that's the time to get up, get your workout on, that physical activity that's so important. That gives you the freedom to have better health, to be more active, to be able to kind of do the things that you want to do, to have the endurance and strength that you need if life calls upon you to have those things. And that's where we use the hashtag 0445 Club. It's all over Twitter and Instagram, and that's something that Jocko has started. But those early morning workouts are awesome, because no one can take that away from you. And then later in the day, if you're going to put it off till 5 o'clock in the afternoon after work, something comes up, something gets pushed, you end up losing that. So this applies though not only to individual. So if you want freedom, you gotta have discipline. If you're a student, you want the freedom to make good grades and open opportunities and have the best job offers that are out there. You gotta have the discipline to buckle down and make good grades. If you want to perform on the athletic field and have the freedom to excel, you got to have the discipline to train yourself, prepare yourself, study and learn and grow and develop, and that's going to give you the freedom to excel. And it definitely applies to the team concept as well. In our task unit Bruiser, we had disciplined standard operating procedures for everything. How we got into vehicles, how we got out of vehicles, how we got our head counts, how we took down buildings, how we patrolled, how we get all of these things. And that, it may seem that was restrictive, but it actually gave us the freedom to operate at an extremely high level. So that I could say, if Alex was a part of our unit, I said, Alex, go hit that building over there. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have to tell me how he's doing it. I don't need to understand, how he's going to walk through that. His team knows exactly how they're doing it, because we already know that. We're following a disciplined standard operating procedure, and that gave us the tremendous freedom to operate at a very high level on the battlefield. So this concept is absolutely crucial. If you want to be better, if you want the freedom to excel in anything that you're trying to do in life, you got to have the discipline to do the hard work, to get yourself prepared, to make sure that you are implementing disciplined time management systems and disciplined financial planning and disciplined standard operating procedures within your team, so that you're able to excel and win.
Yeah, and the exercise here is actually pretty interesting and simple, really. So Leif already gave you two examples think of an example in your life where you think you don't have enough freedom. You gave the example of financial freedom, you gave the example of not having enough time. And when you have that problem, let's say whatever it is that is applicable to you, so pick that and then think about it this way. It's a little bit counterintuitive. So if you don't have freedom in a particular area of your life, the solution is to actually develop more discipline in that area of the life. And I think that's one thing that is kind of counterintuitive, and I've seen people struggle with. it's the exact opposite. So you don't have enough freedom. The solution to that is to be more disciplined. And that would actually develop, basically makes you more efficient in whatever area it is. And it would give you, it would open up more time to actually, let's say as an example of time management. The solution to having more time is to be more efficient with other aspects of your life so that you have more time to put into creative work, into creating the next, working on your next project. So think of whatever it is in your life that you need more freedom in, and then brainstorm some ideas of how you can apply discipline to improve that. So with that, I think we're gonna wrap up the video.
Thanks for having us.
This was a lot of fun.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. And hopefully I'm gonna have him back in some way or shape or form on our program at some other time.
Hope you guys enjoy Extreme Ownership. This is an outstanding program, and I think
It's in
you
your
gotta
box.
keep reading books and learning from people. This is a great program. Proud to be part
Are
of
you guys planning to write more books?
We are. We're working on a second book.
Okay.
To be determined.
You don't have the title
coming out
yet?
the next year or two.
Okay. Can you give us like a glimpse of what it's gonna be about?
It's building up on the same concepts that were in this book, and some that we just tangentially touched upon. One of them is training. Talk about how do you develop a training program. We talk about how important that is. Every leader should be trying to work themselves out of a job. Why that's important to create trust and confidence in teams for decentralized command, and that's not something we were able to get to in Extreme Ownership. So that's going to be a big piece of that. And then a lot of it's going to be about the mindset of being default aggressive, of being able to go out there and want to be proactive to take on challenges, and innovation, adaptation is a critical thing on the battlefield as well. And that's another thing we'll be writing about.
Okay, and this book, was targeted towards pretty much everybody can use this book. Is your next book also something that is for everyone?
It'll be the same format. It's a combat example, principle, and then application in the business world.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot. All right, guys, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this, and bye.
Thank you.